So what we have in the shop here today is an Alexander Model 200 double horn. This is a pretty nice horn. It's got some cosmetic damage, some dents here in the bell tail, but is only here for cleaning, so I'm not going to do really anything else. We'll definitely check some solder braces, check the valves, align the valves, do all the cleaning, maintenance stuff. This is an interesting horn. It seems to be in a gyre wrap, right? You've got the change valve down here, farther from the player, down next to the third valve. But it's different than a normal gyre wrap in that this is actually, these two slides are stacked on top of each other. So I have with me a Lewis horn. This is the horn I play on a regular basis. So you can see on the back of this horn that the main tuning slide's here and the F tuning slide, so this is the F extension part of the horn, it's right here. They're side by side, pretty much in tune, is lined up. On this, the main tuning slide's here and the F extension slides on the back of the horn. So it's actually a little bit different than a traditional gyre wrap. Yes, I play on a Lewis and it's awesome. But anyways, this horn's here for a clean, so I'm going to go ahead and disassemble it and get it in the back. First thing is to take off these things. I'm going to start by removing the slides, just one by one. Okay, with the slides done and out, I'm just going to go ahead and start them by putting them in the sonic cleaner while I work. And go ahead and turn it on, get it heating up. While it heats up, you go ahead and take the rest of this apart. You do want some heat. Basically, in my sonic cleaner, I'm not too fancy. I just have degreaser from Zepp, made by Zepp. I have their degreaser in there and just water, tap water, whatever. There's probably better ways to do it. I've heard you can put chemicals in there. I've thought about doing that in the future. At this point, this works fine for me. You do want it to heat up, and that degreaser will work better, especially on some of the junk stuff. Sometimes the degreaser doesn't do the job all the way, but at that point I take it and do a chem clean. But I think for this horn, it's not too dirty. This is going to work just fine. Let's start to work. Now this horn plays okay, but I have a suspicion about it, and that is that the valves are not aligned, because there's some pretty stuffy notes. And on a horn like the Alexander, even if it's not a real popular model like the 200 isn't all that popular, I would think that valves would be misaligned if it's not playing quite right. Okay, so yeah, there's definitely some valve misalignment going on. Let's see if we can get this into focus. First valve, that's where it's sitting, pressed down. It's not quite even lined up all the way open. Second valve, wow, that's way off. Okay, third valve, yeah, it's lined up there, going a little far here. And the trigger doesn't quite go far enough either direction. So definitely gonna have to do some alignment on these valves. But first off, let's just pop it off. These can be removed. Not every horn is this easy, but these two screws here, boom, boom, and this whole assembly just pops off. So it's a pretty nice system. Not every horn is this easy. I was recently working on a Finca Brendan, and that was this way. So maybe it's these German horns that they're nice to the technician. This kind of setup saves me a lot of time putting, especially if the springs are good, putting those springs back can be a real pain. So it's not too bad. This really helps. This trigger assembly, its spring is pretty dirty, and it's just gonna have to come apart here. So out it comes. As you can see, based on this spring just kind of being dirty and just being a lot of junk in there, I'm just gonna go ahead, and I went ahead and pulled this whole thing. We'll clean this rod up, all these parts, and the customer will be really happy with that. slide the valve out. Okay, it's not looking too bad. It's kind of oily. It's a little gross. So yeah, I am going to remove this and replace it back on when done. These aren't too hard to do. Okay, with the horn completely apart, temperature of my sonic cleaner is looking all right. So I'm just going to go ahead and, first off, valve slides. So when I do put these slides in, I like to make sure water gets all the way up in them. So what I do is I dunk them this way, let it fill up, okay, rotate it, let the air come up to the top here, rotate it back around, and it'll fill up the rest of the way like that. And just drop it in. These obviously are just easy. You just dunk. So with all the parts in there, parts of the horn, I'm going to go ahead and cover the sonic cleaner. Press go. Okay, so the sonic cleaner just turned off, and I've reset my workshop here with a number of different tools. Put the horn off to the side. What I have here is a bucket with some water in it, a vacuum cleaner with on and off here, and it actually is set up to blow air, not suck air. That and the parts. So I'm going to go ahead and remove these parts from the sonic cleaner. Oh yeah, these turned out great. So they're looking clean. You don't want to scrub valves because that would take metal off, and this is smooth. There's a little bit of tarnish, but all the junk, as you can see here, all the junk is gone. There's some tarnish inside, but I can't feel it. So sonic cleaner did a good job on these. They weren't too dirty. So what I have this water here for is what's on this is a solution of degreaser and water. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to rinse off these parts in the water. Okay, one at a time. What do I use the vacuum for? It's this kind of thing. I just blow a little air on these. Sometimes I didn't get all the water out. Especially out here in Phoenix, it's real dry. They dry right off. With that done, I'm going to dive into the slides. Pull a few of these out, put them on the bench. And what that sonic cleaner has done is taken all this junk, oil, garbage off. So I just go ahead and wipe all that off with a cleaner towel and rinse the slide out. Then I take my brush and snake through each slide, just making sure any junk has been gotten out. Try to get it all the nooks. Empty that water out. Then blow it out with a vacuum. Nice, so with all the slides done, I'm going to go ahead and put the horn in the sonic cleaner. It's nice that it has a cut bell. That makes it a little easier for me to stuff as much of it in there as possible. Okay, if I come in this direction, I can fill the lead pipe and the valve block up. And I do it in two sides, this side and the other side. One day I'd like to be able to afford a bigger sonic cleaner, just because this doesn't do French horns very well. But I'd like to be able to afford one of those one day. Alright, the sonic cleaner is off, so now it's time for me to get this horn. There we go, all drained out of its gunk. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is go rinse this off in the sink, okay? And when I do that, I'll snake it out. I'll snake this lead pipe here just in case there's anything glorious that comes out of this. Let's see. Oh, yeah, juicy. Oh yeah, there's some good stuff coming out of here, so. Okay, so after a good snaking in the washroom, pretty good decent amount of junk that came out here. But I'm looking here, I see no more residue left in the valve casings. They're looking good, some tarnish. It's not shiny in there, but I'm seeing it's looking pretty good overall. I am gonna pick out this little, any junk that's made itself into this little hole. Yeah, looking good and clean. So this one's ready to be blowed out real fast. Okay, so after a good blowout, this horn is pretty dried, so it's ready for reassembly. Okay, with the horn all dried out, it is ready to be reassembled. So like normal, I'm going to start with the valves here. I've got my Schmidt rotor oil number 11, and my bearing oil. I'm going to start with that bearing oil right here on the bottom bearing, 4, and then the rotor oil. Here, just enough on there to seat it well. Make sure there's good lubrication. And then rotor oil, bearing oil on the top. A very important part, I'm going to come zoom in while I do this. In aligning these valves and getting them ready to be seated correctly, if you see if I can get it focused, these hash marks right here, okay, they're going to line up with hash marks on the rotor casing right here. Okay, once I get those lined up, what I'm going to do is I'm going to seat them just a little bit with my fingers so that it's not going anywhere like that. Okay, and once that's seated, I take my block of wood with a hole drilled in the end. It's flat surface, right? And it seats the valve, bearing right in. So I just hit firmly enough so that seats that all the way in. Rotate the valve from the bottom just to make sure it's seated well. Go on to the next. And do all the valves the same way. Okay, once that's done, like per usual, I come over here, we've got the stop plates. Okay, and while they're out, I'm going to go ahead and put new bumpers in them. So what I've done is I've worked these bumpers into the stop plate. You do want to be careful when you're doing these edges can be pretty sharp, but that worked in well. So this is the number 4, the trigger. So I'm going to go ahead and put it on. And per usual, it's time to check the alignment of this thing. Okay, so here's an example of this rotor. You can see the one I'm turning here. It's lining up well on this side, but when I come to this side, see how I have to push it just a little bit to get it to line up? So like I showed before, I use a razor blade. I try to keep these real sharp. Okay, so we're coming in right here. Ooh, this one's hard to get an angle on. I'm gonna go ahead and pop this off. And you see, we're just trimming a little bit off. And this razor blade just cuts right through this rubber. So you gotta do this carefully or you're gonna be replacing that bumper again, or you're gonna be scratching the outer casing of this horn, and neither of those are ideal. So after doing that, pop this back on. It's a little bit closer. I'm going to go ahead and trim a little more off. Come at it from this side. Right, and after that trimming, you can see lining up perfect here. We're lining up perfect on this side. So that's a well-aligned valve. So I get to go on and do the rest of them that way. Okay, so now it's time to put these finger paddles on the horn, get these valves all ship shape, ready to go. So I'm going to start with this thumb lever. Before doing this, I'm just going to wipe up any leftover grease, oil, whatever. Go ahead and put the spring on. This always takes a little bit of figuring out for me. They're all different. Yep, very good. So this is a nice system. I've already got the spring. I decided to reuse it, just clean it up some. Because it is strong, all you have to do is push it in like that and push the rod in. And boom. You have yourself a trigger lever. It's all spring loaded, locked and loaded and ready to go. Just like that. Pretty easy to work on. I do like this valve section. I'm not a huge Alexander fan. I've always been a Con guy. But this is a nice valve section. This bracket sits on top of this bracket and the screw holds it on. It's not really a rocket science. So let's see. And there, just like that, we've got this section reinstalled. So all I need to do is reset the linkages and we'll be good to go. People say German horns are or German products in general are over-engineered and hard to work on. I think that's true of their cars, probably. I've worked on cars and I prefer stuff, but I mean, this valve section is really well thought out. It's pretty easy to work on. The screws are all accessible without removing too much. The springs are easy. Yeah, so this is a nice horn to work on. I don't think it's over-engineered at all. It seems to have lasted a long time. Still works great, so I have no complaints. So I'm going to go ahead and reset the linkages. You can see we've got just one screw holding on the linkage. It's not really rocket science. Get the little screwdriver. Where's my flathead? Get the little screwdriver, snug that up a little bit, and you have yourself a working valve. So it's not really that hard. It's easier than string linkage. So there we have it. It's a fully functional valve block ready to be played. I've never liked these valves feel personally. They kind of feel like they're fast, but they kind of maybe feel mushy. Kind of bleh. It's not like on my Lewis horn I showed you earlier. It's just lightning fast, very responsive. This isn't that. It's probably due to that mechanical linkage, but you know, it works well. Definitely fast, light, easy. Could play light stuff on this if needed. So yeah, so let's go ahead and put the slides back in. Okay, so as suspected, I did find some broken brace, and it's this solder joint right here, so I am going to fix that while I have this horn in the shop. First, I'm just going to grease up the slide. Go ahead and do the thing, grab my flux, just a little drip of that flux right there. Grab my handy dandy solder. A little bit of heat up that point right there, get that flux drawn in, and then just a tiny bit of solder. It's not going to take much. Heat it up slowly so as not to burn the lacquer. Thankfully it's a good lacquer, not a bad one. And just like that, with a little bit of a solder ball right there, knocked off, we are in business. Go ahead and gently tap this slide out. It's probably pretty warm. Oh yeah, that's solid. And dunk it really fast, just to cool it off and also get that flux out of there. And with that, you can see solid brace again, so easy repair. It's not broken anymore. Looks good. Those are some of the easiest to fix. A little more grease on there. And there we are, a completed horn. So now it's time for a play test. Let me put it into general tuning register. Okay, so of course you don't usually really clean the bell, but I am just going to use the paper towel I've been using. Put a little water on there, degreaser, and just wipe this thing down. There we go. Just clean the rings out. Just for good measure, a touch of bearing oil in the rings. Really helps them go on smooth. This is a very heavy bell. I bet you it's that garland on there. But man, it is just, it's like a pound. Okay, so we are in business. So let's give this horn a play test. You may be wondering, is this horn a Euroshank? Yes, this is my Euroshank mouthpiece. It's a Hauser, Houghton H2 +2 shank, and this horn eats it all live. It just goes almost all the way down, but it does seem to center fine, good enough for play testing. So I'm going to play test this horn. So, great horn. It's got a tight feel to it. It's Euroshank and everything, but I think the customer's going to be happy with this job. And that will end this day in the shop at Wade's Brass.